The United States Iowa caucuses are the first test in the nomination process for the next American president. A record number of Iowans gathered Monday night to start the selection of the Republican and Democratic presidential nominees. U.S. Senator Ted Cruz was declared the winner for the Republican Party, but it came down to a narrow victory for former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton over U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders. CCTV's Nathan King begins our coverage from Des Moines, Iowa. And Nathan, let's start with an explanation of exactly what a caucus is.
Yeah, a caucus is very different from a primary. A primary, you turn up on a given day, throughout the day, put your vote in and leave, a bit like normal voting. A caucus, you have to go at a certain time, 7 p.m. here in Iowa. You get in the doors, and then you have to listen to speeches from representatives of all the candidates, and only then do you lodge your vote. Now, that's what happens on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, it gets a lot more complicated. Each candidate has to have a 15% threshold before they're allowed to go forward, so they have to count everyone who turns up to a caucus. Then they do the speeches, and then anyone who isn't, then they vote, and then anyone who's below 15% can go to another party. So there's actually arguing in the room. That process is called realignment. That can take anything up to 2.5 hours, and I can tell you, because so many people turn up to a caucus in Iowa, it took about 3 hours sometimes last night when it came to the Iowa caucus. Now, this happens all over Iowa in 1,681 precincts. So let's get to the results first of all. And Iowa lived up to its name as a surprise when it comes to the caucus. Polling is never totally accurate. And on the Republican side, we did see Senator Ted Cruz actually on 28%. He beat Donald Trump by 4 points. Donald Trump was the favorite, self-financing billionaire here, leading in the polls as well. And coming in third was Rubio, senator from Florida, a more mainstream candidate, the conservative winner, Ted Cruz. He wasn't expected to do that well. He got 23%, just 1% behind Donald Trump. His momentum going into New Hampshire is going to be interesting. On the Democratic side, it was a nail-biter. The closest result in all Democratic Iowa caucus history, with just 0.2%, 0.2% in it. Hillary Clinton declared the winner, but only after a night of counting. She will take it. Now, let's listen to some of the reaction. The Republicans first, really quite happy Ted Cruz, but others fighting, going on to fight in New Hampshire.
Iowa has sent notice that the Republican nominee and the next president of the United States will not be chosen by the media, will not be chosen by the Washington establishment, will not be chosen by the lobbyists, but will be chosen by the most incredible, powerful force where all sovereignty resides in our nation, by we the people, the American people.
We will go on to get the Republican nomination, and we will go on to easily beat Hillary or Bernie or whoever the hell they throw up there.
Tonight here in Iowa, the people of this great state have sent a very clear message. After 7 years of Barack Obama, we are not waiting any longer to take our country back.
You could feel the relief in the Hillary Clinton camp that they actually eked out a win here. Remember, she famously lost 8 years ago to then Senator Barack Obama, who went on to become president. It's a win, and she will take it.
I will keep doing what I have done my entire life. I will keep standing up for you. I will keep fighting for you. I will always work to achieve the America that I believe in.
I think the people of Iowa have sent a very profound message to the political establishment, to the economic establishment, and, by the way, to the media establishment.
Yeah, so lots to play for going forward, but a very exciting night, Anna.
Nathan, as you mentioned, the next big test is New Hampshire, and the candidates, in fact, are already focusing their attention there. Many have already arrived there. But let's put Iowa into some kind of perspective.
They're all there, yeah.
What will the impact of Iowa be?
Well, the impact of Iowa is going to be felt in the next stages of the race. The fact that Ted Cruz, a conservative candidate won out here. It is a conservative state. Is very interesting. He's an outsider politically, along with Donald Trump. So this outsider anger with Washington feeling is very much baked into the cake on the Republican side. Now, Marco Rubio, being a middle-of-the-road establishment candidate, is very interesting. He polled very well, indeed, 23%. So he's the candidate that everyone who's not an outsider can coalesce around, so long as he does well in New Hampshire. That is bad news, of course, for the rest of the establishment figures who are really trading in the polls, including Jeb Bush, whose father and brother were president. He only got a few percent. The governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, got a few percent. Kasich, the Ohio governor, got only a few percent. All these people, if they do not do well in New Hampshire, will have tremendous pressure to drop out. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton squeaked out a win. Yes, she did, but it was very narrow indeed. And in New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders not only has momentum from Iowa, he has a lot more support there. His home state of Vermont is next door, and he has a big lead in the polls. So if he, as expected, wins that, given the momentum he's got from Iowa, it will be 1-1 going into South Carolina, and then the big Super Tuesday in March, where lots of states all vote on the same day. So the Republican race still wide open, and the Democratic race wide open when it comes to Hillary Clinton and Sanders as well.
Thanks, Nathan. That's CCTV's Nathan King reporting from Des Moines, Iowa. Well, joining us now in Washington is Lara Brown. She's the program director of the Graduate School of Political Management at George Washington University. From Toronto, we're joined by Haroon Siddiqui. He's the editorial page editor emeritus for the Toronto Star, Canada's largest newspaper. Also with us here in Washington, D.C. is Joe Madison. He is a radio talk show host with Sirius-XM's Urban View channel and a civil rights activist. Thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Lara, before this caucus in Iowa, the pollsters were telling us that this was going to be a comfortable win for Donald Trump. But they got it all wrong, didn't they?
They did. And they got it wrong really because they largely underestimated the number of evangelicals that would turn out. So what you saw, for instance, in the Des Moines Register poll that came out just before the caucuses was that they had predicted or assumed that there would be about 47% of the Republican caucus goers would be evangelicals. In fact, the entrance polls last night showed that that number was 62%. So it was quite an extraordinary difference, and it really made the difference for Ted Cruz.
Joe, these were the first votes that were cast in what is going to be a very lengthy process, of course, culminating with the presidential election in November. That's 11 months away. But looking at it now, why are the Iowa caucuses so important?
Well, number one, because they're first. That's really what the media gravitates to. Number two, it also tests the candidates. It tests how strong their organization is, what kind of ground game. For example, the other reason I think that Cruz beat Donald Trump was he had the money, he had the large crowds, but what Ted Cruz had was a tremendous ground game. And it sort of reminds me of what then candidate Obama had. It was a ground game, door to door. It's retail politics, and that's what a lot of people said in the exit polls. They appreciated seeing Donald Trump at rallies, but they wanted to sit down and have coffee with Donald Trump. That's how you play the game in Iowa. So it's that it's first. The other thing, it now gives momentum in fundraising. And then finally, you end up eliminating the undercard. O'Malley's gone, and I suspect that there'll be a few of the Republican candidates that will drop off.
Haroon, when we look at the election at this stage, we are seeing support for candidates with radical agendas. On the Republican side, Donald Trump, and on the Democrat side, Bernie Sanders. Sanders did well, Trump not so well, not up to expectations. But does that surprise you, and is this election going to be very different from previous ones?
No, you see, as a Canadian looking at the scene, I have a different perspective, and it really is that what we see is not the traditional raucous American democracy in motion and in action. What we see is really scary because there is a tremendous lack of sophistication what we have in candidates are literally, not literally, but bomb throwers and rabble-rousers who would say anything to win a vote, who would say anything that their money patrons tell them to say. Mr. Trump, who is a billionaire and is a celebrity at the same time, so he combines American celebrity and big money. So to us, it's a very scary prospect to see that the greatest democracy on earth, the most powerful democracy on earth, has entered what really to us looks like a surreal kind of era where it is not only the public but also the candidates are divorced from reality.
Lara, there's something else about Iowa, and that is it is more than 90% white. It's hardly representative of the demographic makeup of the United States. So why is a state like this, Lara, given such prominence?
Well, it really is given this prominence because of historical tradition. Our nomination process has evolved tremendously from the time of the beginning of our republic. In fact, we really created the Electoral College with something of an idea that it would actually nominate the people for whom the Congress would then select the president. So in fact, we have a very different system that has evolved, and it's evolved through the parties. And this evolution, where we are right now, where Iowa and New Hampshire are the first, and they are the most important and prominent, came about actually in the wake of the 1968 Democratic nomination of Hubert Humphrey, which happened at the convention. It was a riotous convention. Democrats were very upset that he became the nominee without having been in any primary. And so what you see now is an entire process that has essentially grafted itself to this through kind of deals with party brokers and state politicians.
I'm smiling because I remember 1968 very well. That's where Julian Bond, for example, was nominated to be vice president only because they needed time to get the African-American delegates seated. The Mississippi delegates couldn't be seated, and it was a time of racial divide. Now, what interests me a lot is I see a lot of that developing now. It's like people are trying to take us back in time. Look what Rubio did, and maybe most people didn't catch it, but our guest in Toronto makes a very good point when he says, you listen to Rubio say, we're going to take our country back. Well, as an African American, I'm saying back to where? What are you talking about, take your country back? These are code words, and I suspect that Donald Trump is going to go into Super Tuesday. This is where all these states, down in Mississippi and Georgia, and he's going to use that, what now is no longer a dog whistle, it's a siren. And we've not seen the last of him.
Haroon, when we look at these...
Joe, you know, there's another issue. Another issue really is that take the country back from whom?
Yes.
I mean, there's a cultural warfare going on, cultural insecurity. As Lara says, you know, we should not get too bogged down in the various niches of this electorate or that electorate, which she's obviously right. But these people are going to take the country back from home. They're rabble-rousing for the white disaffected people in America. One could ignore it, simply saying this is New Hampshire and this is so-and-so. But look at the public opinion polls across the United States. Republicans, what is it? Nearly 70% of Republicans think Barack Obama is not even an American citizen. 60% or thereabouts think he's a closet Muslim. I mean, these people are totally divorced from reality. They don't believe in global warming. They don't like Mexicans. Trump calls them rapists. They don't like Muslims. They are gripped by Islamophobia, by fear of terrorism. I mean, this is not a healthy state of affairs for any party, let alone a party, one of two parties in the greatest democracy on earth.
So not a healthy state of affairs, Lara, but a candidate like Donald Trump has tapped into that disenchantment among big groups of people.
Certainly, and we've had candidates like this in the past. I mean, in some ways, this really isn't new to America. We can go back to a George Wallace. We can go back to any number of people at different moments in
Barry
time.
Goldwater, yes.
And
Yes.
this is somewhat part of the tradition, I would say, in America, that yes, there are appeals to notions of taking the country back. Most people might be surprised that that was actually Howard Dean's slogan when President George W. Bush was leading the country. So we do have an extraordinary amount of vitriol that isn't just ethnically or racially motivated or even religiously inspired. It is also deep into our party system at this moment. We have tremendous polarization that we haven't seen since another time that was as politically restless, which was the Gilded Age, when we also saw such sort of anti-immigrant sentiment arise and so much of these similar politics.
Joe, what were your main takeaways from last night?
Oh, my main takeaways was that the bully got slapped.
Yeah.
And I think now the Republican candidates who survived aren't afraid now to go after the bully. I think that the other takeaway is that the young people who emboldened Bernie Sanders are now active. But I warn you, though, they were also active in 1968 with Eugene McCarthy. And he was the anti-Vietnam candidate and didn't last very long.